Okay, Michael Smith is an international expert in complementary medicine and natural health products with global experience in regulatory and strategic development. Professionally educated as a pharmacist and licensed as a naturopathic practitioner, Michael has worked in these sectors for more than 15 years. During his career, he has held a number of senior regulatory positions, including head of the Office of Complementary Medicine, the TGA in Australia, as well as the director of the Bureau of the Partnership, Outreach and International Affairs, Natural Health Product Director at Health Canada. In 2009, he was appointed to the World Health Organization's Expert Advisory Panel on Traditional Medicines, and as I learned just a few moments ago, they have recently published their second global strategy for traditional and complementary medicines, which is on the World Health Organization's website. So please welcome Michael Smith.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm feeling a bit intimidated on the stage because I'm most certainly not an expert in omega-3s, omega-3 products, EPA, DHA products. I've come across them an awful lot as a regulator, and I know that I'm a lapsed regulator, and I was recently described as a policy wonk. I'm not quite sure if that was a positive or negative statement. I wanted to give you some kind of perspective from the other side of the desk. I won't be able to provide probably more information to you on omega-3s, but hopefully a bit more insight into what goes on with regards to regulatory affairs, how the regulations are developed. Taking a global view, my particular interest is in international regulatory cooperation. I've always been taught you speak about what you know about, so my background and my focus will be on dietary supplements, natural health products, complementary medicines, which have been actually regulated within a drug-based setting. So the Canadian model and the Australian model predominantly. I come from a military family and an ex-regulator, so I am a little bit anal, so I like an outline. So what I want to do is set the stage for omega-3s. I want to give you some idea of how the regulations came into being in a number of these countries. Regulatory harmonization versus regulatory cooperation, and then some final ruminations. So everybody in the room knows this, and yesterday afternoon, the presentations really did give a good idea of omega-3s and where they stand. And omega-3 products really are on the cutting edge. They are included with regards to dietary supplements and natural health products and complementary medicines, but when you look at the science, there's a robust science, a global market. And rather than going over this again, because this is more for my use than yours, based on what I want to talk to, I always tend to use an example that I'm familiar with, and when I'm really desperate, I use my mother. My mother takes omega-3 product. She takes one that's recommended by a doctor. The reason this is quite exceptional is my mother is not some hippie grandma, very conservative lady from the UK, completely ignores what I tell her about natural health products, still thinks I was very silly to give up my safe job with Boots the Chemist back in 1980-something. And she takes it. It's quite regular. Her GP recommended it. So I think that really gives a flavor of I think, where omega-3 products exist in many of the mature markets. Please don't tell my mother that I didn't say that she was a hippie grandma, but she's not. One of the challenges from a regulatory standpoint is these products exist in one country under many different disguises, many different regulatory frameworks, which can be an opportunity and can also be a bit of a challenge. So looking at the regulations, I like this part from Mary Howitt poem with regards to what regulations. And I think what regulations, if we're very candid, regulations bring opportunities, they bring credibility, they bring legitimacy, they bring the ability to actually protect the consumer, and I think they give an ability to help industry grow. And you've seen growth in a number of countries with mature regulatory frameworks, where I think this is the case. Of course, they also increase control, they decrease speed of product production, they have a wonderful administrative burden. So there are pros and cons, and I'll leave it up to you to define who is the spider and who is the fly. I think it depends on the conversation. I think one thing I would like to, important thing I'd like to kind of leave you with the message is, the regulator is part of government, but the regulator has one key role. The role of the regulator is to protect the consumer. And in more enlightened opportunities to provide them with an environment to make an informed choice about whether to take or not take a product. They're not there to support innovation. They're not there to support complementary healthcare practice. They're not there to support academic development in this area. Sometimes they stimulate research. Sometimes they probably are another hurdle to overcome. The reason I say that is one of the challenges with regards to being a regulator is managing expectations, both internal and external to government. When you look at the two models I'm more familiar with, the Australian model and the Canadian model, both have government reports. And in those government reports, the governments assumed that the regulators would support innovation, would support a robust academic sector, and would support, in some places, the practice of complementary medicine, which obviously they were accountable for, but absolutely had no power to do anything about. This is the slide which really defines how regulations are defined. And I always have a kind of smile when people talk about evidence-based regulations. This is a variation of a quote from Otto von Bismarck. I've taken out the word law and put regulation in there. A lot of people tell me it's also a quote from Mark Twain. A lot of things go into defining a regulation. Some of these I'm just going to pick out, and I think a lot of people know this, but again, I want to kind of give some kind of feel of how these regulatory frameworks aim to be. In a regulatory framework, a subset of product has to exist in some frame. So in the United States, a dietary supplement is a type of food. In Canada, a natural health product with specific regulations is a drug. In Australia, complementary medicine is a therapeutic good. And when you go to every country, there are a few examples. It's going to be interesting to see what New Zealand's doing with their Natural Health Product Supplements Act. And with the exception of some countries with regards to traditional medicines, for example, in Singapore with Chinese proprietary medicines, they have to be somewhere. And when they're somewhere, they always have to interact with something else. And I'll give you an example. In Canada, whether you like them or not, the Canadian regulations for natural health products, state-of-the-art regulations. Developed in 2004, everybody was consulted, open and transparent, specific for a group of products. And it was put in a regulatory framework when, at that time, a food, and the Food and Drugs Act in Canada was defined as, and I'm kind of taking some poetic license here, a food is anything that can be taken as a food and chewing gum. Not really surprising that a lot of the initial functional foods were being captured by the Natural Health Products Regulation, and a lot of the caffeinated beverages came to market as natural health products. That's changed now. Regulations are developed nationally, but have to work internationally. But one thing I want to really emphasize on, because it's something I didn't realize until I was actually in Health Canada, was the size of the sector. You have a sector which needs to be regulated, which ranges from sophisticated omega-3 products, sophisticated phytomedicines, to traditional medicines, to multivitamins, to homeopathic medicines. And I checked last night, you actually can buy homeopathic EPA. I'm not quite sure the claims and the evidence behind it, but it's there. The market and the regulatory framework has to deal with all the intricacies of all of these products. The markets are huge. In Canada, Health Canada's made 60,000 regulatory decisions. That's 3 times as many drugs, OTC and prescription drugs, on the Canadian market. I've heard in the US there could be as many as 100,000 dietary supplements on the US market. In Australia, about 25,000. Very expensive. At the height of the Natural Health Products Directory in Canada, the annual budget was $15 to $20 million a year, and there was 200 staff. Lots of emotion and passion in the sector. That's a good thing. It gets things done. It can be a bit of a hindrance sometimes. I'm not sure if Lauren Israelson's in the audience, but he shared with me the tidbit that with regards to the development of DSHEA, there were more congressional correspondence with regards to the regulation of dietary supplements than all of the subjects but the Vietnam War. In Canada, in 2008, when they were looking to regulate the Food and Drugs Act, and there was concerns that this was going to be affecting the natural health products regulation, the writing campaign and the parliamentary correspondence was greater than the other hot issue that year, which was same-sex marriage. So a lot of political involvement here, also both internally and externally to government. So we've got an idea about about the regulations themselves. So on the global set, a lot of people always say, well, why can't we just harmonize? Why can't we just assume that one country can make a decision, and then we can accept that decision? And really, it's not a hard concept to grasp. You can guarantee that if one regulator has come across a challenge or one market has come across a challenge, another market has also been there. They hopefully have come up with a way of fixing it. Why can't they just work together? This is a quote from the British comedian Stephen Fry. And I'm going to look at some of the factors considered. This is something I have been involved in developing MOUs and plans of action and letters of agreements between regulatory agencies. And I just want to kind of pick up a few points here. The first thing is, what are you actually comparing? A dietary supplement in the United States isn't exactly the same as a natural health product in Canada, which isn't exactly the same as a complementary medicine in Australia, which is not exactly the same as a health food in China, which is not the same as a supplement on the EU market. So if you were thinking there was an apples and oranges domestically trying to regulate these products, here we're talking apples and trucks. It's a large difference. It's also very expensive. It's resource intense, takes a long time, and it's really built on trust and partnership building. And something as well, which I must admit I didn't realize, was when you're actually signing a registration application, a license, you want to be pretty sure you know the information behind that. So there needs to be an awful lot of confidence building between the regulators before an individual is going to put his or her John Henry or Josephine Henry on the line. And as we all know, politics is always local. So I'm picking two countries, countries that I know well, so Australia and Canada, but also if any country in the complementary medicine natural health products world we're going to be able to harmonize, these are the two. I mean, basically, you've got Canada, big and cold, land of the polar vortex. Australia, big and hot, land of the great white shark. But when you look at the countries, similar legal systems, both specific definitions for complementary medicine and natural health products. If you make sure you don't see any opera houses or mountains, if you look around the streets in Vancouver, you could be in Sydney, probably more rain. Toronto has two claims to fame, one a very animated mayor, and then the other one is, according to the UN, the most cosmopolitan city in the world. So both very similar. English is an official language in both countries. It's interesting when you see Canadian and Australian regulators talk, there needs to be a different English spoken in each country. Industry is robust, but more importantly, they have a very strong history of working together as regulators. As you know, there is the International Conference on Drug Regulatory Agencies, where all the drug regulatory agencies meet every year, and dietary supplements have been on the agenda for the last 20 years. Every year, the heads of agencies, of the regulatory agencies, meet. Ottawa has hosted once, Canberra has hosted once. They're on global task force together. They co-chair regulatory units from pharmaceutical drugs to GMP to medical devices. So there's a strong relationship between Health Canada, between the Therapeutic Goods Administration and Australia. So let's kind of apply that to omega-3 complementary medicines, and I've added foods as well. So a complementary medicine isn't exactly the same as a natural health product, but even assuming the definitions are the same. In Canada, it's mainly centralized in Ottawa. So the federal government regulates most of the foods or natural health products for compliance claims. Know that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, parts of it have actually moved from the Department of Agriculture over to Health Canada, all in the health portfolio. So a unified approach. Australia, complementary medicines are really the purview of the Commonwealth government. Foods, largely, while standard settings may be made by FSANZ, Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, they're actually enforced by the states, which take a different approach. So it's going to be interesting to see who you get in a room to actually work out this regulatory harmonization. For complementary medicines in Australia, very, very good levels of GMP internationally. Best GMP for dietary supplements in the world, bar none. Canada has a paper-based system, which was largely developed because when the regulations came in, it would have been hard for American products, US products from under the shade to actually cross into Canada, which would have been a huge barrier to both consumer, the regulator, and industry. But Canada has a pre-market approach, compendial review, monograph review, traditional medicine review, whereas Australia has more of a post-market listing system for most of the complementary medicines on the market. Both are wrestling with the food complementary medicine and natural health products interface. So looking at harmonization and will it ever happen, and last week it was the Chinese Year of the Horse. My Chinese sign is I'm a water rabbit, which sounds very sweet. You've got to speak very, very quietly. Diplomatic, consensus building, positive, want things to happen. And I can tell you now that regulatory harmonization in this dietary supplements, complementary medicines, natural health product sector will never happen. Regulatory cooperation, on the other hand, I think there are opportunities here. And I've listed some things which are things in process now. One of the reasons I went down to the TGA was I was borrowed by the TGA from Health Canada, and they approached me in the middle of January, so it was very nice to accept the offer to go down there. But there are some barriers to regulatory cooperation. One of them, I think, is governments don't want to invest in the time and the money and energy which is required for real regulatory cooperation. And I'm very specific in saying governments there. I've never met a regulator who doesn't see the power of regulatory cooperation. But regulatory cooperation is expensive, it's long term. And something which is cut from the budget is always international travel, international meetings. But I think this really is an opportunity for industry to step up. I think regulatory cooperation is going to be pushed by the industry sector. I think the omega-3 sector is very, very well placed to play a really active role here. It's not that regulators and government aren't interested. It's not their priority at the moment. There are some models to think about. This one that I've been involved with, and it's one called the International Regulatory Cooperation on Herbal Medicines, which is a WHO brokered group. A rather unhappy acronym of IRCH. The good thing of coming from a bilingual country is everything is good with the French accent, so it's IRCH. That's what we like to call it. 26 countries meet annually around herbal medicines, really working very hard with regards to safety issues and how they can share workloads. The next step is going to be to introduce industry and academics to be part of this process. The last meeting, I believe, was in Brazil. So some final thoughts, ruminations. Following on from Aldo's points yesterday about not making predictions, this is Harold Macmillan was the British Prime Minister in the late 1950s. When asked by a journalist what would define his term of office, he said, "Events, dear boy, events." So predictions are hard. But the trouble with normal is it always gets worse. And again, this is my professional guessing coming on here, so I could be completely wrong. But what I'm seeing in some of the in the markets with I don't want to say mature, but have had a regulatory framework for a while, is that dietary supplements aren't particularly sexy anymore. They're large markets, everyone takes them, the companies are huge, they're almost normal. And when I was talking about the passion a bit earlier, it's going to be interesting to see how the consumer sector is going to respond to this. Have they changed? In Australia, the regulations for complementary medicines are being explored, and with some opportunities to maybe even make them more robust, largely driven by a consumer group, largely driven on rather ambitious advertising claims by companies. So again, is it changing? And I think omega-3s, this is a benefit for omega-3s, but also products with a challenge, because I think within the dietary supplement sector, omega-3s are very much seen as the creme de la creme. This is a quote I really like from the American comics, the Smothers Brothers. "Red meat isn't bad for you. No blue-green meat, that's bad for you." And I use this one because everybody would agree that safety is the number one concern. And if something is unsafe or of poor quality or adulterated, every responsible member of the sector, industry, academia, regulators should be acting. But here I'm thinking about the perception of safety. And as Harry said yesterday, the neutral studies and how they're picked up by media, which has changed greatly from 20 years ago when Big Pharma was coming to get us. Now it's people are dying in the streets because they're taking a dietary supplement which had a neutral study supporting it or not supporting it. I remember there are two kinds of media now. There's bad news. There's bad news and there's sensational news. So there's no good news. So if you want to get a message out, you've got to make it sensational. And the other thing I want to emphasize is the quickest way to stop a regulator doing his or her daily work is to have a bad media day. Because I can guarantee you, when both of the examples quoted yesterday with regards to omega-3 products, my colleagues in Ottawa and my colleagues in Canberra, their entire month was probably taking over briefing everybody on why this isn't going to impact on the regulatory framework. Mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. I'm not sure if where this quote comes from. It was used by my former boss, Phil Waddington, who was the first Director General of the Natural Health Products Directorate. And this was the mantra he used. If you're going to have a discussion, everybody in the room, the regulator, industry, doesn't matter. This is the way to go. Don't be soft. Be very specific in what you want. Come with a solution and say it with respect. And it may sound a bit wussy, but I think this is something which really worked and should work. Keep it simple. There are two things here I want to kind of I want to talk about. The first one is communications with regulators, not about a specific product, obviously, but generally strongly encourage you to join organizations like GOED, like in the States, UNPA, CRN, other organizations, Canada, CHFA, the Canadian Health Products Association in Australia, the newly named Complementary Medicines Australia, ASME, because it keeps it simple. It can get very Python-esque sometimes when you have everybody and their mother forming an interest group and trying to speak with the government. And the second thing I want to see with Keep It Simple is what we're seeing already and what's going to be happening is an increasing looking at the resources going in to regulating allegedly low-risk products, especially in a mature sector. At the moment in Canada, all over-the-counter drugs, so painkillers, cough medicines, are regulated by the Natural Health Products Directorate. So everybody has moved, all the resources have moved over. So even though it's called the Natural Health Products Directorate, it actually regulates all over-the-counter drugs, according to the drug regulations, not Natural Health Products regulations. So in effect, they've created a self-care directorate. I think this is probably the way some people are going to go. Simply on this new risk-based, well, not this new risk-based model, this new priority put on a risk-based approach. And also money. I think we're going to increasingly see things which were dietary supplements or natural health products not being deregulated, but seeing if regulation was really necessary. Far more compendial approaches, pre-cleared information. At the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be a challenge for innovation. So I think products will have to migrate over to the over-the-counter market or even the prescription market. And there are opportunities and challenges for a sector which is as sophisticated as the omega-3 market. I know this sounds very much like a tree-huggy, big tent kind of approach, but I think this is the only way things are going to work. And when you look at things that have worked, this is the way it's worked. Don't give up on the principles, obviously, but make sure there is a real spirit of collaboration. And of course, that's a good day. On a bad day, I think the American philosopher Alexander Jablokov really had it down pat. And this is something we just really have to live with. Thank you for your time.